So welcome to the third in the series of Deepening Your Joy of Living. And this talk today is about how we deal with suffering. How do we deal with perhaps unavoidable suffering? And the first in the series was about an overview of the different sorts of goals that we can have in life, which is, achieving deliverables, achieving goals, achieving objectives is one, becoming more of who you truly are is another. And the third is about being. And this series, of course, is about being, deepening the joy that we experience moment by moment in life. And in the second session, we spent time on thinking about all the different practices that we can do to help us deepen our joy around being, whether it's meditation or listening to music or spending time in nature or dancing or doing yoga or sitting by a river and looking at the river or skiing or playing football. There are many, or looking into the eyes of a baby or a child or a loved one, or even perhaps into the eyes of, carefully, of people on the tube or the metro, being fascinated by people in the world. And so that was the second session. And so this is the third session, which is, well, sometimes, life isn't so joyful. What do we do about that? How do we deal with suffering in life? And I've thought a lot about this topic, and I've also consulted quite a range of different colleagues as well. I came up with my own thoughts about it, and then I posted something to a group of colleagues. And so I'm really quite interested in sharing this with you today, and to really help us with our practice of how we face into suffering, whether it's psychological or whether it's physical pain, whether it's the small slights of life, or whether it's the big ones, such as someone close to you dying, or mental illness, or some great tragedy within your own family, or some big change of identity, like a divorce or the end of a career or something of that sort. There are many different ways that we suffer in life. I have to come clean with you that I'm quite strong on how we deal with psychological suffering, because I've had my fair share of that. And, praise be the Lord, touch wood, I haven't had that much physical pain in my life. And so in terms of practicing dealing with physical pain, I have some experience, but not massive experience. I think probably the worst thing I've ever had in terms of pain is really severe toothache. But once a dentist had to wake me up because I had got into such a profound state of meditation that he wasn't sure whether I'd passed out, but that was probably to do with the anesthetic anyway. So I'm claiming to be a great expert on physical suffering, although I have had some experience of that dealing with clients. So let me share with you the model. So the first level of dealing with pain is completely unconscious, and it's what trauma victims do. It's dissociation. It's unconsciously leaving your body and disappearing. And although a lot of psychotherapy is about bringing people back into association, back into their bodies to experience life, because, if you're out of your body, then you're not going to experience and engage in life very well. Nevertheless, on the battlefield, in high trauma situations and situations of sexual abuse, disassociation may be a really good thing. And the story that I like to tell about that is the mystic, and I've forgotten his surname now, Jim Finley, who says that when he was a child, his father beat him by day and beat his mother by night, and that he spoke to her. He said to his mother, "What can I do?" And she said, she was a Catholic, she said, "Pray to God and God will help you." And he did pray to God, and God gave him a safe place where he could not be hurt anymore. And of course, later in life, when he became a psychologist, he realized that was dissociation. But then he says the telling line, which is, but who is to say that wasn't a gift from God? He couldn't feel the pain anymore of the beatings. So we don't want to dismiss dissociation, but also many of us, including myself, are coming back from dissociating from my body, because just the pace of modern life, just the way that British education system works and European education system, and for those of you who are American education system, a lot of it is about disconnected from your felt experience, because, you know, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, you know, man up, little boys, big boys don't cry. You know, women also have a hard time in the modern world as well with their work, and often, very often, if women are mothers, they're doing more than their share of the, you know, the child raising, all of those different sorts of things. So most of us have feelings that we've dissociated from. And if you're involved in psychotherapy or counseling or personal evolution or emotionally based coaching, part of the journey is about coming back to your felt experience, and perhaps reprocessing feelings from the past that have never been properly processed, so that you can let go of those past situations because you've processed the emotion. The problem with dissociation is that you don't process what happened at the time, and therefore it can pursue you all of your life. I remember it was very difficult to express anger towards my mother as a child, and at about the age of 45, I started processing it. But it was quite sad that it took me, you know, I held on to a feeling for 40 years, for a large part of my life. So the first category is dissociation in terms of dealing with suffering, dealing with pain. The second one could be called disassociation, which is intentional, standing back from the feeling, but it's also differentiation, which is that the feeling is there. You might connect with the feeling. You might you want to be very, very present with the feeling, but you're not lost in it. So to be in your body, to be present with the feeling, but to have a separation between the entirety of who you are in your body and the feeling. So a very useful tip is not to say I am in pain, but to say there is a part of me that's in pain, because there are always parts of you that are not in pain. And just remembering that will be helpful in holding it. So that holding that space for, that really being present with the pain, and not exactly welcoming it, but holding it with resources is a really good method for dealing with pain. Not to push it away, but to hold it close with love and kindness, and recognizing that it's not all of you. And there's a big difference here. We have to introduce an idea of, you could talk about, states of well-being or body-mind connected states, and unresourceful states, you could call it that. And the generative coaching people would talk about a coach state, which is centered, open, aware, connected and hospitable to yourself, and a crash state, which is contracted, reactive, analysis, paralysis, separated, hurting, hating, hitting. And so the emotional state that you bring to the suffering is going to have a massive impact on how you experience the suffering. If you are, cursing whatever it was that happened that brought you the suffering, if you are cursing yourself for the suffering, if you're saying, oh, it must be something that's wrong with me, if your interpretation of the reason for the suffering is very negative, and then you'll be pushing away the suffering. Whereas if you can just be present with it without making a story about it. This is the key piece, without making a story about it. So there's two sorts of suffering, you could say. There's the physical pain or the emotional pain. And then there's the story about the emotional pain or the physical pain. And let's, right at the outset, reduce to the greatest extent possible our story about the pain, because that, you know, that's just a story. It's not, it's your, you know, it's not a real, it's imaginary, it's created, it's constructed. Stories are constructed. And of course, because we're so addicted to internal dialogue, to our inner voices, to the narrative of our lives, all the opportunities that we've missed or weren't loved enough in our childhood, we're very addicted to the story, but it is a constructed story. And a lot of psychotherapy is about just changing those stories. So the first thing is, if you get really present and you welcome the feeling without making a story, it's going to be a lot less painful, whether psychological or physical, than if you're battling it or have a story about it or not accepting it or not welcoming it. So that's the first part. And then the sort of third method that I want to mention is, we could call it opening the field, or opening the peripheral field, or spreading awareness. So just in the body, you start to pay attention to everything else that's happening. If it was physical pain, everything else that's happening in addition to the pain. There's a pain in a part of your body, but there's also your toes, your elbows, your head, your guts, your, you know, all the places that aren't hurting. So then there is a part of you that my elbow feels pain, you know, the place that has physical pain feels pain, but there's lots of places that don't feel pain. Actually, I want to go back a step, because I talked about the coach state, the state of well-being, body-mind connection, resourcefulness, and the crash state. A part of being able to hold the space for yourself is having this open, connected, generous, resourceful state available to yourself. And actually the field is a part of that. When you know, not only broaden your awareness in terms of physically, but, you know, broadening your awareness in terms of what you see. The word peripheral, why is it called opening to the peripheral field? Because if you stare at a point, you could do it right now, stare at a point on the screen, for example, and then soften your gaze, you can see things both in the foveal vision and also in the peripheral vision. And what you see in the peripheral vision is in soft focus. Peripheral vision is very, very useful. It detects movement. It's not very good at detail, but it detects movement. So that already is changing your state of consciousness. And just using peripheral vision is a method for taking yourself into an altered state of consciousness. You're aware of much, much more. And actually, it's a different part of your brain that's activated. It's your right brain rather than your left brain. The left brain is the linear logical part, and the right brain is the one that experiences directly. So and then I can do the same with sound. So I've got all the different things I can see. And of course, many of you have done exercises with me where you see 4 things, hear 4 things. So again, many of you have heard me lead a guided meditation where we listen to what's outside the house, to what's inside the house, to what's in the room, to the sounds in my body, to the internal dialogue. So when you're broadening your awareness in that way, then you're much, much more than either the emotional or the physical pain. So that's differentiation or disassociation. But really, I actually don't like the word disassociation here. I'd actually say more like bringing awareness to, bringing presence to. Actually, probably I would change that. I think that's more of a psychological language, but I'm just changing my notes here. Bringing presence to, bringing mindfulness to. And then, so there's bringing mindfulness down into the body, to where the pain is, whether it's emotional or physical. And then there's broadening into awareness. And whether you're doing that from a resourceful, generative state or from a crash state will make a big difference to whether you experience it as painful, more painful or less painful. From a body-mind integrated state, from a generative state, certain sorts of pain are particularly welcome. You know, my longing for love should be welcome. My saying no to abuse or invasion of boundaries is welcome. You know, anger, appropriate anger can be welcome. If I'm going to be run over by a London bus, fear is welcome. You know, appropriate levels of emotion are welcome. They provide you with messages. It's of course that sometimes feelings are much stronger than they need to be to provide the message that's required, or sometimes emotional feelings that are in the present have been exaggerated or magnified because of historical things that have happened. Somebody doesn't want to meet with you, and it reminds you that you were lonely and abandoned as a child, and therefore you feel you have a very strong feeling about something that might just be practical for the other person, as an example. And there are two levels to this as well. So the first level is that there is the mindfulness, whether it's just being really present with the feeling, whether it's physical or emotional. I'll talk more about physical in a moment. And also the broadening of awareness. And of course, the third position, which is just disconnection. And in bodywork, in somatic experiences, they teach something called titration, which is only feel as much of it as you can handle, as you're sufficiently resourceful to handle, and then step back, and then feel a bit more, and then step back. So one of the, the problems that people with PTSD suffer is that the feeling is so overwhelming, they have to disassociate or dissociate. Whereas actually, if you say, actually, let's have a little taste and come back, that was safe. Okay, let's have another little taste and come back, that was safe. Let's have another little taste. And slowly the feeling gets processed. So there's always, the willingness to move between disconnection and connection. And then, so that's important. And then also when we talk about the resourceful state, we can talk about what psychological resources and spiritual, actually you could say, what resources do you want to bring? And if I take a sophisticated model, such as the one from Gebser and Steve Gilligan's Creative Mind, one would say, there's the resources of the people I have met, the people who love me and support me and believe in me, the resources of archetypal figures, of famous figures. How did Nelson Mandela deal with the pain of being locked up for 27 years, or how did Milton Erickson deal with his physical pain while he was doing psychotherapy? But I can also have the resources of my ancestors, the resources of my community of mind, which the resources of nature. How would nature handle this? And I'll talk more about that. The resources of spirit and the resources of other people. I'll come back to those topics in a moment. because the first level is to feel and to mindfully feel and to broaden awareness. And the second level is to engage. So how do you engage once you're there? So, there are, for example, Steve Gilligan's relational mantras. That's interesting that I feel this, so curiosity. I'm sure that makes sense. There's I've got this feeling in my gut. I don't know what it's about, but I'm sure it makes sense. And also something is trying to wake up in me. All feelings have a positive intention of pointing to something. And so if there's something that has awakened you emotionally, you're curious, you're interested, you're sure it makes sense. And perhaps you say, there's something waking up in me, or, this feeling, you're welcome here, particularly with emotional things that come up. There's a message that's been communicated that is very often has been suppressed and that needs to be addressed for you to come back into balance again. So there's that sort of curiosity and positive intention. There may be, as I've mentioned, psychological resources that you want to apply. There could also be, prayer, call and response. And I was talking to a colleague, Natasha Lithgow, about this, and she's a Buddhist, but she's also, very involved in nature and nature practices. And I was saying, well, who do you pray to? And she was saying, sometimes I pray when I'm being a Buddhist, I pray to the Dharmakaya, which is the space of phenomena. But I might pray to the inner wisdom, which you could call Buddha nature. Or I pray great mystery of nature, or I might pray to use Celtic ancestral songs. She knows Celtic songs, and they remind her of her ancestors. And so then she's praying to her ancestors. And she says, I really love this. She said, it doesn't really matter what you pray to as long as it's about love, light, and life. And I thought that was a really nice way of talking about it. And I, of course, love to pray to all sorts of in many different ways, because I don't believe in fundamentalism. If I get stuck with an image, it becomes boring. So, I can quite happy to have Buddhas and Jesus in the same image, or Mary Magdalene hanging out with Yeshe Sogyal from Tibetan Buddhism, whatever it is that is interesting for me in that day in terms of resources. But there's, the prayer of call and response. We're relational creatures. So we call out, we get response. So when we come to the thought, so if we're talking about other resources in the community, there's the independent self, there's the community of mind. The community of mind could include, calling on my ancestors or calling on members of my family. And the research says that if you have suffering, physical suffering, this is science research, and you are with your romantic partner or someone who loves you, even if they're not particularly engaging, the pain will be less. We're relational creatures. So community is part of the process of dealing with our suffering. Whether it's, the one person, and it could be, your romantic partner, but the thing about the mother's kiss, there is actually research about the mother's kiss, that the mother's kiss reduces pain for the child. There is evidence that supports that. And so sometimes if a friend gets hurt, I'll give them a kiss and just say, this is your mother's kiss, But any relational contact that's heartfelt and connected can make that difference. I love that quote from Kurt Vonnegut, which is that we're all here to help each other get through this, whatever this is. And I like the whatever this is, You know, there's not an answer. Part of being human is that we're not certain of all the answers, but we can help each other get through this. And so that you know, the key thing for anyone who's depressed or in grief or in physical pain, whatever it is that's going on, is having the courage and the support to reach out to other people and to talk about it, which is why counseling circles are good. You know, the Samaritans are good. Friends who know how to listen are good, listening skills, you know, all of those things. And we all know about, there are people not to talk to, the ones who give you advice, tell you, you know, how you could solve the problem, and the ones to talk to who will listen and say, yes, I hear you. And that, you know, that reduces pain, both at a physical and an emotional level. And so, so there's, you know, so part of how we deal with suffering, both at a physical and emotional level, is by communicating, talking, connecting, relating, rather than doing it all on our own. And sometimes there's a price to pay. I know someone who had been a rugby player and came to me for psychotherapy because he was very disconnected from his feelings. He got reconnected with his feelings, and then he discovered that a part of the benefit of the emotional disconnection was that he wasn't feeling the pain in his joints and his knees, and now he was feeling his rheumatoid arthritis. So we had to do some other things to help him deal with his the feeling of his rheumatoid arthritis. By the way, folks, some forms of physical pain, it's not really a topic of today, can really be reduced through connection with nature. There's quite a lot of research about that now. And that's really another topic that does relate to today, that being, you know, we talk about the peripheral awareness. We talked about peripheral awareness. And a great place for peripheral awareness is in nature. And, you know, mindfulness, when one can broaden one's eyes and see all the little waving leaves on the trees and see the expanse of sky, and then smell down and smell a flower or a bush and listen to the bird song. There's a lot of stimulation that supports us feeling connected to a broader sphere than just, you know, whatever's happening to us at that time. I, had some early life experiences that were really quite difficult and pre-verbal as well. And I was in an awareness practice. I'm part of a awareness practice community. And I was really trying to hold the space for this feeling without getting lost in the feeling, not identifying with it completely, but not being disassociated from it. So I was like broadening. And suddenly I popped into a sort of state of just feeling completely one with the universe. And one of the few things I remember about it is when you're not really observing yourself when you're in that sort of state. One of the things I do remember is my fingers were like little baby fingers going like this. And a few years later, with the same teacher, you know, we were talking about, you know, not the experience of the non-dual. And I said, oh, you know, I'm not sure I have had the experience of the non-dual. And he said, yes, you have. I saw you. You were going like, you know, you were going like this. So that sort of broadening of awareness that is supported by nature is really a way to deal with suffering. Let me just look at my notes and see if I have any other points that I want to make. Yeah, I think I've covered all the topics. Just to talk a little bit about physical suffering, because I think it is different to just, not just, but to emotional suffering. And as I've said, I'm not so much an expert on this, partly through my own experience, but I have really noticed that if I'm not pushing physical pain away, but I'm I mean, sometimes I've just gone into it to such a degree that I'm not naming it anymore. So once you give up the naming of it as pain, it can, really interesting to feel the sensation. So you can titrate that. So titration, what does that mean? Sipping. It means having just got some physical pain, just see if you can really feel it for a few seconds. How is it if you really feel it? Maybe the label of pain and the associations are worse than the experience itself. Or then you try, let me just say, I've got this pain here, but there's all this other things going on. I'm aware of all these other things. And also, I'm not saying I am in pain. I'm saying there is a part of me that's in pain. All of those things will really help. And also the paying attention to other parts of your body, but also paying attention broadly to sounds and to space. And I think there is something about the meaning we make, which is that, the more we can welcome. So enlightenment is the ability to welcome and be close with one's whole direct experience without judging it negatively. And if you're judging negatively your pain, it's going to be worse than if you're just saying, oh, it hurts, it hurts, it hurts, but with no story about it. So one of the first things is to give, to let go of the story about, oh, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't, they shouldn't have done this, they shouldn't have done that, But just to be in that mindful state without the story, that would be a key step. And then if because we're such story-making machines, another option is to make a positive story. And the sort of, easy positive stories to make are, so that's one of the purposes of spirituality, to have narratives that are about growth. So one of the things that is true, it is true about life, is that someone who comes through suffering, has learned a lot and has become a deeper person. And one of the sad things about the world is that even though success is great and good fortune is great, and it can make us more successful and more confident, and it can also make us happy as well, but it doesn't give us depth and wisdom. It's the people who've come through suffering are the ones who get the depth and the wisdom. So it's not very helpful to say, oh, this really, really hurts, but it's going to give me depth and wisdom. You can't do that. But to have a sort of a story that says, this experience is a part of my growth into fulfilling my potential. It's a part of my journey into fulfilling my potential in life. And the person who talks about this, well, actually, there are two people who were in Nazi concentration camps. One is, of course, Viktor Frankl, who said there were three forms of meaning in life: meaning through love, meaning through giving your gift to the world, and meaning through how you face unavoidable suffering. And he really, when you read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, you can really feel his compassion for the people who were the guards in the camps. It's really quite remarkable. And there's another psychologist whose name will come, Bruno Bettelheim, who also wrote in the same very, very compassionate way about the guards in the concentration camp, that both of their hearts got opened in a way that was really remarkable by having such a horrific experience. Actually, Nelson Mandela is the same. He decided, first, if you got sent to prison for 27 years, how would you respond? Keeping your coach state, keeping your generative state, keeping your purpose, keeping your sense of life calling, that would be quite hard when you're sent to prison for 27 years. But And this is something that differentiated him from many of the other ANC people, which was that he said, because he so strongly believed in his vision of peace, he said, I want to understand the Afrikaner mind. And therefore, the only Afrikaners that are available to me in prison are the prison guards, who, being a prison guard is not a great job. They were probably, not the most educated, broad-minded, people. They had their troubles of their own lives. But he decided that he would make friends with them so that he could understand the Afrikaner mind. And as his years went on in prison, he became friends with them. And, when he would move from one part of the prison to other, guards would just collect in a sort of group and just walk with him to chat with him. And I probably can't quite remember the story correctly, but after he was released from prison, I think before he was president, he'd gone to a diner that had been his favorite years and years ago. And he was there with his entourage in this diner. And there was a white guy sitting at another table. And people at his table noticed that this guy was really sweating and trembling. And in the end, Nelson Mandela said to one of his colleagues, go and ask him to cut this man to come and sit at our table. And the guy came, he was still trembling and sweating, and he ate with them and he left. And someone said, what was all of that about? And I can't remember the complete story, but he said he was one of the bullies in the prison. He was one of the people who abused us. But I wanted him to know that the new South Africa, there was going to still be a place for him. So I think, so that meaning through how you face unavoidable suffering is one of the things that really deepens character and deepens, our sense of meaning in life. And I do this as a practice for quite a selfish reason, which is that, I think getting old and dying is pretty scary. And, if we're lucky, we'll die easily. And if we're unlucky, we'll die badly. We don't know what it's going to be. But if I can deal with all the little everyday sufferings that I have well, then that's practice for me to deal with the difficult sufferings, should they ever come along. So I think this is sort of quite important, how we deal with this. And of course, spreading awareness, there are two other forms of meaning in life: meaning through giving your gift to the world, and meaning through love, community, connection, both the close relationships, the people in your close group, but also the distant relationships, which are the people in this, on your street, in the shops, in all of those places. Those social relationships, including the distant ones, are one of the keys to longevity and happiness in life. So I've been talking for quite a while now, and the last part I want to say is share it, share it, share it, share it, share it. Find places where you can talk about your suffering at an individual level, one-on-one, whether it's with the right sort of friends, or the right sort of people in your love circle, not necessarily romantic partners, but in your circle of people who love you. Share it with professionals if you need to. Share it with, find your tribe, share it in groups, find places. All of those are supportive. Even in the medical system now, they're recognizing some of this. I had a slightly nasty biopsy operation, and the most relational of, and it was under local anesthetic, but nothing else. The most relational of the nurses in the room had the job of holding my hand and looking into my eyes during the course of the procedure. And I could really feel her connection. It really made a difference. And she was affected as well. It wasn't, it might have been her job on that day. Someone said, who'll do the hand holding, or whatever they would call it. And she obviously, was either volunteered or, volunteered herself. But there was a moment that was important for me, which was as I was being wheeled out of that operating theatre, she was standing in the corridor, still looking at me as I went. Now, I'm sure that wasn't probably, that what part wasn't part of the training. That would have just been a natural empathic response. And so they, they'd been clever enough on that day, I can't speak for the system, to have someone who was connecting empathically, and at least at an emotional level, who knows, probably at least at an emotional level, they knew it would make a difference. Whether or not they knew it would make a difference sort of in terms of physical pain, it's, I don't know. So any questions or comments? Particularly questions at this point. Let's take questions first and comments second. So, makes sense. There's no hurry to ask questions either, just feel your version of it.
Julian, I've got a quick one. Sorry, the dog's barking, so we'll have to try and ignore her. The suffering bit, the only downside of that would be you're just sort of reinforcing it in a way. If I was talking to my coach about suffering, that would be fine. But if I was going around, telling everyone, my friends and family, woe is me, I don't know, it feels like I might be reinforcing it. So I do put it in, but not a lot, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all, someone who goes around saying woe is me all the time, they're gonna probably lose their friends, or just have woe is me friends, and then you can both be miserable together. I think there is something about repeating the same story. One of the criticisms of humanistic psychotherapy is that the emotionally cathartic, is it's great to tell the story the first time. You haven't told your dark, awful story, and then it's probably helpful to tell it the second time, and the third time. I could go to 5 times, but at some point telling the same story is no longer helpful. Now you have to be careful, because there may be a nuance or empathic connection, something additional in the system that is healing in the repetition of the story. But at some point you have to sort of say, oh, I'm just telling the same story. So it's not about always talking about your suffering. In fact, it might be really helpful to talk about other parts of your, spreading awareness. I tell you about my suffering, but I tell you about my joy. I tell you what's great. Most of you will not be suffering. Only a small part of you will. So so the gratitude exercise would be a great thing. If you have a tendency to talk about just to focus on your suffering, then you want to broaden your awareness, and then do something like the gratitude exercise every day. 7 things I'm grateful for today. I'm still alive. It is important to not, there's a delicate balance. I remember a very attractive woman I knew who, I met her one day, and she had hearing aids, and and she'd been sort of quite a wild girl, gone to lots of concerts, and had damaged her eardrums. She said, yeah, but my hearing aids are quite hidden, and your glasses are quite sort of, on your face, and I'd much rather have my hearing aids than I'd have your glasses. She sort of had a positive frame on it. So I think having a positive frame on it, which is what you've learned from it, what you can get from, what you've learned from it, having a positive frame about your life, is your whole identity involved in the terrible thing that happened, the divorce, the fact that you're not with your kid, or whatever it is, or the career disappointment, or the loss of your child. Is your whole identity completely wrapped up in that, or is your other parts of your identity grateful for other things? And how do you have some sort of balance around all of that? Isn't it nice to know that you've got all the great things in your life, as well as the places that are still wounded and have difficulty? And isn't it nice to know you can have both together at the same time? It's not to have one's identity completely wrapped up in any single story. And that, to catch yourself, what do you ruminate about? What do you talk to yourself about? What's the story, that narrative that goes round and round and round? Am I still telling the story, I'm not good enough or I'm not lovable? I'm not lovable is one of my ones, because that's how I felt as a kid. But I'm 66 now. It's a long way since I was 5. That sort of message is about another era. I am loved in this time, and I have lots of love in my life. So when that little voice comes up from the past, I can just be, stroke him on the head and say, hi, you sweet thing. You've come just to remind yourself that you need a cuddle. I'll give you a cuddle. And I'll take you to a friend and we can have a cuddle with a friend. I can be sweet like that. But not to be dominated by those things. To see them for what they are, from where they come from. There's a story in my family about success. I have a bit of a story in because I have a great grand uncle or something who was a prime minister. I have another one who won the Nobel Prize. I have very, very rich, ancestors. When I was a child, all the walls of the house were covered in pictures of my famous ancestors. So my sort of joke is, well, I've got to be better than a prime minister and a Nobel Prize winner. So, what am I going to be? I've got to be, president of the United Nations or something. It's ridiculous performance standard, isn't it? Like measuring success in that way. So my father thought, to be successful, I need to be a rich banker. So he founded a bank without either having the competence or the experience to run a bank, and proceeded to lose all his money and the money of all his friends. So it's sort of the stories that control us are a part of the suffering. And we need to see those stories and say, there was a time once when I didn't feel seen by my mother or my father. And that doesn't mean I'm not seen in my life now. Those little voices. Thank you for that question, Marina. Other questions or comments? I will say something actually. One of the things that you really have to look for, if you're hanging on to an old story, it may be because you're just still fucking angry about it. But who is the person you're hurting most by being angry about it? It's yourself. It's called cutting off your nose to spite your face. That hanging. I hung on to anger towards my mother. I said, at some point in my childhood, I said, I will never love again. Then I walk around my life with, I'll never love again, I'll never love again, I'll never love again. Who am I hurting? I might have hurt my mother for a few years, but really, who am I hurting? It's myself. I'll never open my heart again. There's a line in the David Whyte poem, it's not actually, well, there is a line in the David Whyte poem, but there's something else quote about, it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. Because if you do love, you will lose. One of you, even if you married for life, perfect, one of you will probably die before the other. My mother said, why did your father leave me? I said, well, he died, Mum. You blame him for that. It's better to, and then the cynical version of that is it's better to have loved and lost than to have never lost at all. That's the really cynical version of it. So, hanging on to your anger about what happened only damages you. Again, I can't think of her name. It'll come to mind in a minute. but I can't think of her name, but and the story's just come to mind, but it's a good story. You know, her father was in the IRA blew up the hotel in Brighton when Margaret Thatcher was speaking at the Conservative Party conference, whenever it was, in 80 something. And her father was killed in that explosion. And the person who killed her father, the IRA guy, finally got arrested and went, let's put your, served his time. But she, always wondered about him. In the end, she went and saw him, and she stayed 5 minutes, and they argued, but they kept agreeing to meet again, and they met again, and they met again. And I saw them do a talk together at St. James's Church in Piccadilly in London. Sorry, it's a pity I can't remember her name. It'll come back to me. But she said, I didn't want to hang on to that hostility towards him. I didn't want to hang on to it. So that's the thing, the forgiveness is for you, not for other people. They may feel better about forgiveness. Great. What else? Anything else before we do a meditation?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I had gone through a pretty big period of grief in 2020, and I lost a brother and a sister, both passed away, and I went through a long time of just feeling flat, like not motivated, not inspired, and it wasn't until that lasted quite a while after the initial, after their initial passing away. And it went on for quite a while that I'm just like in this state of just flat, just not happy about anything, not sad about anything. And I wasn't conscious that I was numbing out until somebody else told me, had told the story, how they were dealing with grief and that they were totally numbed out. And I said, oh, that's it. That's what's happening. I'm numbing out. So sometimes maybe I'm doing something unconscious and still somebody else kind of brings the word or names it that, that I realize, okay, that's how I've been dealing with this.
It's really helpful. It's great to have friends like that, ones who don't push too much, but ones who point things out like that. And of course, numbing out can be appropriate, but not forever.
Right.
That's the whole thing. It's sort of like, if I'm really, if you're really distressed and you have to watch YouTube, fine. But if you then spend your life on YouTube and all your feeling experiences are numbed by whatever it happens to be, that's when it's a sort of problematic. And grief, I think, I'm so glad that you're talking about grief here, because, because your conscious mind is not in control. We have been brought up, we have been educated to think our conscious minds are in control, and our conscious minds work damn hard to act as if they are in control. But the biology, the neurology is that the conscious mind is sort of like the PR person or the linguistic mind, the language mind is the PR person for the somatic mind, which is the right brain. And it's the conscious mind is the left brain, makes the maps, makes the distinctions, makes the language. It's sort of a communicator. But the somatic brain is the one that just directly experiences the world, and where most stuff, and including the unconscious stuff, gets decided. But for many reasons, including the education system that's been going on for a long time, has the left brain, the conscious mind, has started to think it's in charge. It's not in charge. It never has been in charge. It tries to be in charge. So you can't decide how long your grief lasts. I had to say that to someone today. Yeah, it's not, he doesn't decide. But what you can decide is, do you stay close with yourself with the ups? Because one day you'll be feeling great. So, I'm back to normal. Next day you'll be in grief again. You don't, it's about staying close with your experience. And he was saying, oh, I need to get on with things. I said, well, maybe you need to go to bed. I'm feeling tired and exhausted. I need to pull myself together and get on with things. I said, well, maybe you need to listen to your body and go to bed. And so that's that whole thing about staying close with yourself, but also being in good company, which is what you talked about. A friend said, well, maybe you're numbing out a little bit here. And then, we have to watch for the sorts of numbing out, because there can be, watching too much, Netflix, or watching too much porn, or, eating too much is a numbing out, or alcohol or drugs, or, a mild version, but it can be very time is watching a whole box sets. I know someone who watched, once she starts a box set, she doesn't leave a room for a week, because they're so long now, these. Just to watch for those things, and a little bit of it, a little bit of numbing out, or doing, so I sit in the bath and I look at my YouTube on my phone and I spend 45 minutes in the bath, and, that's not such a big problem, really, But if I was spending hours a day doing that, looking at Facebook, that's a numbing out.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be aware of what supports us, and a little bit of, it's good to do activities that don't support us a little bit sometimes, not to be overly rigid about anything, but not to let it go too far. So thank God for your friend, Kimberly. Yeah,
that was helpful.
Yeah, really helpful. Yeah. Grief will take as long as it takes. If it takes, after about 5 years, if you're still incapacitated, then you can sort of say, actually, maybe I need some professional support on this. Or if I'm, even in the shorter term, if I'm very incapacitated, maybe I need some support. And we shouldn't, one of the problems in our society is we think we should all be able to handle things on our own. Actually, we're not made that way. We're not made to handle things on our own. We're made to handle things in community, in relationship. Some of those relationships are just friendships, and some of them are professional. There's nothing wrong with going to an expert and saying, I've got something going on. My friends aren't being that helpful. They're compassionate. This is what you deal with. It's great. That is called wisdom. Getting professional support is wisdom. Yeah. Anything else? Thank you, Kimberly. That's good. Before I do a meditation, I actually want to go into groups and to talk about how has what Julian's been saying, how does that relate to my own life? How does this relate to my own life, and what am I learning from this? So the first is, how does this relate to something that's present in my life? And then the second is, and what am I learning from today's session that might make a difference? 7 minutes per person, 21 minutes in total. The important thing is that one person is allowed to talk, and you really pay attention and you welcome them and you say, tell me more. Yes, a little bit of reflective listening. Don't get into advice. Maybe in their 7 minutes, you could give a little bit of advice at 6 minutes if you wanted to, or you could say, I've got a suggestion, would you like it? But give them 6 minutes of their 7 minutes with just pure listening. 7 minutes per round, 21 minutes in total, starting now. Welcome back. Any comments or questions that come from sharing with each other? Well, if not, then let's go to a meditation. So make yourselves comfortable. It's raining here. You may be able to hear the rain on my window. So if you can, that's good too. Some people like to turn their cameras off because they want privacy while they meditate. But it's really helpful for me when people have their cameras on, because I can then respond to what's going on in the field, in the space. So whichever way you want to do it is good. So let's start with the sort of the mindful presence practice. And just because it's simple and easy, and I hope that by now most of you have got this practice as something that you can do on your own. Let's use 4, 3, 2, 1, which is the sort of essential practice of bringing in the senses. And one way we can vary this is by starting with different senses on different occasions. So let me start today with feeling. So I'm noticing 4 things that I feel, and I'm going to include muscle, skin, and emotion. And it can be helpful to pick a place at the far end of your body, the feet. Sometimes I think I'm like a dinosaur, and the time it takes for the messages to get from my tail to my brain seems like a long time. So between my toes and my head is a vast expanse of sensation that I can attend to. So I'm noticing my toes, muscles in my toes. You could pick a point on your skin. You could notice any emotional feeling that you have at this time. And then one more thing that you feel. And I'm listening to the sounds outside the house. I'm listening for house sounds. And by the way, the absence of a sound is a sound. There's like a space one can listen to. It's like the pause between 2 notes in a piece of music can be heard. So I'm listening for house sounds. I'm listening for sounds in this room that include my voice and perhaps a little bit of an echo. I'm listening for body sounds. Breathing. And if you're very still, perhaps you, and if it's very quiet, you might hear your heartbeat. I'm listening from a distance to my internal dialogue. Basic meditation instruction is to, he says, Dujum Rinpoche says, to stare directly at the thoughts. Well, perhaps at a networking meeting, you wouldn't stare directly at the person, but you can just be very aware of the thoughts, curious, interested. I'm sure this makes sense. Something is trying to wake up in me. Welcome. Being interested, but not completely believing it. The words themselves may indicate something else, a feeling, for example, or a positive intention that needs to be held. So you're curious, you're compassionate, you're interested. And then 4 things that you that you feel, sorry, that you see. So again, recommendation to look at a point in the room or the screen. And then in your peripheral vision, without moving your eyes, see 3 other points, 3 other places. Or if your eyes are closed, there's what you see optically, such as the darkness of your eyelids and specks of light on your eyelids, as well as the images or movies in your mind's eye. And it's so wonderful to bring awareness to what you see on the inside. So much of the time we're only half aware of it. And the same is true for our bodies. Sometimes we're only half aware of the different experiences. Mary Oliver says something about, do you think taking only half a breath, you take only half a breath and call it a life? So noticing 3 things that you feel, noticing the sensations with a freshness, picking a muscle that you don't often feel. I've just noticed a muscle beneath my rib cage. And 3 things you hear. And I notice ringing in my ears and the sound of rain on the window. And 3 things that you see. Two things that you feel, 2 new things that you feel. Two things that you hear. Two things that you see. What do you see now? One thing that you feel. One thing that you hear. One thing that you see. And so just being really aware of your body. From tip of your head to the tip of your toe. Or the tip of your toe to the top of your head. And all those centers of emotional feeling in the belly, the viscera, the pelvis, the chest, the throat. So much happening moment by moment. To really feel your body and delight in the pleasant sensations and bring attention and awareness, and perhaps your warm, loving heart, your curiosity, to anything that's unpleasant. The wise adult you, your warm, tender heart, can hold the space for any place in you that hurts. And sometimes in doing that, we want to invoke resources, remembering people who love us, who show us how to love ourselves. Or thinking of teachers or gurus or guides who show us how to love ourselves, feeling their love. Or figures in the community of saints. And sometimes that isn't enough. And we can pray, we can call and say, hey, help me hold this feeling. And there's an infinite realm of possibility of the saints and holy figures and sons of God and daughters of God that we can call to. Teach me how to hold this, and to hear or feel the response. The response can come in form of light. It can come in the form of sound. It can come just as a feeling. It can come as a quietness or a spaciousness or a radiance or a stillness or rays or a hum. And sometimes it comes straight away, and sometimes it takes a while. You know the old story about thinking that God walks with you, but then in your most difficult time, there seems to be only one set of footprints in the sand. You say, God, why was I alone when I was suffering so much? And God says, there's only one set of footprints in the sand because I was carrying you. Sometimes we're not even aware of how life carries us. Two fish swimming side by side, and one says to the other, tell me, what is this thing called water? And so sometimes with hurt, pain, whether emotional, physical, we just need to hold the space for it in our bodies and say, a part of me is hurting, but other parts of me are welcoming, bringing love, bringing resources, bringing support. And it's totally fine when things hurt a lot. Sometimes to step back and disconnect It's nice to know that we can connect and disconnect. Connection is the most healing, but not too much, not to the point of overwhelm. So only processing the feelings to the extent that we feel able. But sometimes it's useful to just stop and feel the grief and just be at a being level. Sometimes one needs to step back and pay attention to other things. Not to be the pain, not to be completely disconnected. So we're really exploring right now the feeling, bringing resources to the feeling, bringing our warm, tender hearts to the feeling. Let's also explore broadening our awareness. What can you hear that's furthest from you? For me, it's the rain outside. But if I use my imagination, it seems I can hear the sound of the waves somewhere. Or I could hear the sounds of the planets singing in space. Broaden my awareness. I can be aware of everything, or many things around me in this room. I'm aware of the sky and the cloud in the sky. Using that gaze where you look at a single point and then soften into peripheral vision. It's a really powerful way of feeling the space, of seeing the space. In Buddhism, they call this the space of all phenomena. And if we really feel into that space, how is it different to what other people call God? But at least in a practical way, can we feel the vast space in which our pain is only a small part? There is a part of me that hurts. There's a part of me that feels joy. There's a part of me that has a busy mind. There's a part of me that is thinking. There's a part of me that's quiet. And from going down into our bodies, going deeper and connecting more broadly from this place, we can call in resources. Perhaps with prayer, call and response. We can use those phrases that are supportive, like, this is interesting. I'm sure this has a positive intention. Something wants to be known in me. We can connect, and if we feel overwhelmed, we can go back and disconnect. And we can move between the two. And we can pray to anything in the universe, as long as it somehow is connected to love, light, and life. And all of our inner resources are available. Every person who ever said yes to us, every person who has ever been a role model, every character from a story that's ever inspired us, every person we've ever thought of as a great being. Mother Nature, on the vast scale, and the single cell, or the DNA, or the bacteria, on tiny scales. Nature, both in its wholeness and its infinite detail. We can call in. We can call to the healing forces of the universe directly down into our bodies, like a rain of light, like a vibration of sound touching our body, like a wave of breathing and feeling. Or even a scent of something holy. And we can remember that there are people in the world who can hold our hand, who we can talk to. We can remember that there are professional people who can support us. We can remember that there are communities that know how to hold the space. We can develop tribes, groups of people who see us, who get us. To be an active participant in a tribe of people who know us, get us, where we support them and they support us. We're here to help each other get through this, whatever this is. And then in the next moment, we're here to help each other get through this, whatever this is. And each moment, to reach out and to receive, to help each other get through this, whatever this is. And the next moment. And so when you're ready, I'd like you to gently open your eyes and connect to the field, the screen, the people on the screen, remembering to turn your camera on. Stay deeply connected with yourself, but also the resource of this field, this group. This group will only meet in this particular formation once. So let's really appreciate this field today. Many of us may be here next week. There may be other people. Some of us may not be here. This field is only here today. So since we're close to finishing, I'd like you to unmute yourself. Everybody share their voice and just say how they're feeling right now.
I feel appreciative.
At peace and connected.
Peace and connected.
Relaxed and reflective.
I feel quiet and calm.
Feel
Wow.
peaceful and energized.
I feel calm. And
Coming round and disassociated with my toothache.
I feel connected and in peace.
Refreshed and astonished.
I feel tenderness and love and connection. We're all here to get through this, whatever this is.
Mm.
Bye-bye.
bye.
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 See you next week.
Well
Bye.
done, Julian.
Bye-bye. Have
Thank
a
you,
good
Julian.
time.
Thank you, Julia.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.